Hello, hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host, Keegan. And this is your podcast for all mental health, addiction, recovery issues, and topics. And today we have a very special guest, and his name is Daniel Gospodarek. Correct?
Yeah, Gospodarek. Yep. Thanks, Keegan, for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being on the show. So, you're here to tell us your story and kind of let us know what you've been through and what you do now. So, I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up originally in a small town in Wisconsin, and going through high school, going through or middle school and high school, growing up very much in a farming community, working on farms, working in the fields, and then come my summer year between junior and high school or junior and senior year, I was in an auto accident and unfortunately and fortunately suffered a traumatic brain injury. So had to be taken over to a trauma hospital where I ended up needing to have brain surgery. They took off a part of my skull to stop the bleeding. And then from the bleeding, there was a stroke in my left frontal lobe, and then other stuff, fractured skull, collapsed lung, stuff like that.
Oh, man. So that accident sounds terrible. So I'm glad you're okay. And I would have never guessed they took part of your skull.
Yeah, I mean, they put it back on.
Oh, okay.
but they needed to take it off for a little bit just to make sure the bleeding stopped. But then they put it back on.
Gotcha. It kind of relieved the pressure, let it do its thing. But so for those out there, what is exactly a traumatic brain injury?
Great question. So traumatic brain injuries can result from either outside forces, meaning like auto accidents, blows to the head, concussions, football, right? We're pretty familiar in the US with those types of injuries, but also physical violence, gunshots, IEDs or improvised explosive devices from the military involvement. So anything like that. Also, very common with more common with elderly or aging people is like falls. So slipping on the ice, ladders, stairs, etc. So that'd be outside, but they can also be internal, like a stroke, right? Where an area of your brain does not get the adequate oxygen it needs, and then maybe there's some atrophy that goes on, or certain types of illness. So bacterial infections and stuff that can cross the blood-brain barrier can all impact brain, or create a brain injury situation.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a whole list of bad. So, definitely want to avoid a traumatic brain injury.
If it's possible, right? Obviously, life happens, and really, if somebody has a TBI situation, making sure that they can get to the nearest hospital as quickly as can be just as important to make sure those medical interventions are taken care of as quickly as possible.
Okay. But sorry to interrupt. As you were saying.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, right? So in this auto accident, rolled 4 times total. It was just a single car rollover, and then I was unconscious, so I didn't know what was happening. And then get to the hospital, again, still unconscious. They put me in a medically induced coma for about 3 days, like consistently. So they didn't take me out at all. But it was very interesting. I mean, the doctors were like, we don't know if he's going to make it through the night. Like, we will know in the next 24 or 48 hours what it's going to look like. Oof. But they also weren't allowed to touch me because of the sensations that then your brain has to like process and all this stuff. So just family standing around looking but not touching, or anything like that. Come the 4th day, they started weaning me off of the coma during the daytime, and then they would bring me back in at nighttime so I could sleep a little bit deeper. And then it was just, as like I started coming to more, right, and starting to understand what was going on, then they're like, well, let's see how his brain is actually working, right? Like, do you know who this is? Do you remember this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where you are or what happened? Which I didn't. It is really strange. I don't know where it came from or how it came from, but I thought that I had just gone. I'd never traveled internationally before, so like outside of like a large time change, and I thought I went to a time change and I was in France. It was like the
Oh
most
no.
bizarre thing that like and it's like, where did that even come from? I'm like, I don't
Mhm.
know. Like, I mean, I just got hit in the head really hard. Like, I have no idea where it came from. So that was kind of like me reorienting to the world
Mhm.
after all of this. Um, yeah, I think a lot of it was, at that point, like still bedridden. I was in the ICU for 10 days, and I can't remember what day, but it was more towards the end. I started walking with like holding onto a wheelchair, and then I had 3 nurses around me to hold me up in case I fell.
Oh wow.
So, but yeah, I mean, feeding tube, everything. So I think I lost like 20 pounds while I was in there because they would just, it was just like low calorie stuff.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and then I had 7 days of inpatient rehab, and that was physical therapy, occupational therapy, and then a lot of it was speech therapy. But not and it's interesting. So this, I didn't know about speech therapy because it sounds like
Mhm.
speech therapists just work with speech, right? Like that's
Yeah.
in their name. But they also work with a lot of the muscles that go into speech,
Hmm.
right? So
That.
like because they cut this side of my muscles on my head, right? Like
Mhm.
all of my muscles over here pulled everything on my face to the right, right?
Oh
So
no.
this whole side of my face shut down, right? Like I couldn't close my eye, like I couldn't really move my lips, um, or this side of my lips, I should say. So then they were like shocking me. The speech therapist was like shocking me with little, like, it was like, I can't remember if it was 2 or 4 AA batteries with like a moist sponge on like certain nerve endings to like, she would like, she would shock me. My left eye would close automatically. Like I wouldn't even try it. It would just like,
Uh,
because she's just trying to get these muscle fibers to fire again
mhm.
as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
Um, and then we started getting into not so much the speech part because I could talk, but it was more of like being able to focus on a task and then
Mhm.
switch concentration to another task and then rotate again and then come back to the first task where I left off, like really working that working memory.
Mhm.
And then finding the words I needed, I really struggled with for a while when I would talk. So, and I still
Mhm.
do sometimes if I'm very tired, that still comes up. But yeah, did 10 days in inpatient or 7 days in inpatient, and then did 3 months of 1 to 2 times a week physical therapy outpatient, and then 1 to 3 times a week of speech therapy for 17 months.
Wow.
So it was definitely the long haul.
No, yeah, for sure. That is a very long haul. Uh,
Hmm.
and you kind of unlocked a new fear for me. Like I don't want anyone to cut those muscles on my head now.
I mean, I didn't have a lot of say in what they were doing, so.
You just wanted to get better, so
Uh-huh.
I don't blame you. I would have done the same thing. But I mean, last time I was in the hospital, I checked myself out against medical advice.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, so how did having a TBI affect your life?
Yeah. I mean, it also happened that summer between junior and senior year of high school, right?
Mhm.
So we're kind of on that cusp of adulthood, and you know, I mean, I'll start with school. So first,
Okay.
um, I was told that I wasn't going to be able to graduate with with the class that I started high school with while I was in the ICU,
Mhm.
and I don't even know where this came from. I just told the doctor I would, and I did, and it was really weird, like how like some of these things just kind of happen. But
Mhm.
again, I think you lean into like how you were raised, your character and stuff, and you find different internal resources to push through and have that grit. That I mean, recovery is pretty difficult if it's addiction, if it's TBI, if it's cancer or living with a chronic illness, right? Like there's a level of like you could give up, but you can't. Like
Yeah.
so it's kind of forcing your hand, so to speak. Um, but yeah, so going back to school, so I started at the end of August with school, but like my fatigue level was so high. I was sleeping probably like anywhere from like 12 to 14, 15 hours just at night, like just straight. I was so tired. And then I would probably average like a 1 to 3 hour nap during the day on
wow.
top of that. So like my fatigue level was enormous. So we had the block schedule at our high school.
Oh yeah.
So we just had like 4 hour and a half classes a day. So essentially I would go just for the first two, and then I would go home and sleep. And then I would do the first two. And then by the second semester, I was able to do one full day and then one half day and then still take naps.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that part was hard to like adjust to, concentrate, like figure out like, is my brain actually still working? Can I learn stuff? But ended up graduating. Jumping backwards though, like moving into senior year, right? Like people are pretty much like applying to schools, secondary schools or colleges, or like going into the military. And it's like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life right now. So there was some of that identity piece that came up of like, what am I going to stand for? Where is this going to lead me? Is it going to lead me anywhere? So a lot of like self-reflection, a lot of a lot of self-esteem and like grief and loss too, because going from like a 17-year-old that was very able-bodied before to now being like, I can't really play pickup basketball games anymore because I can't get hit in the head, right? Or I can't stay out late at bonfires anymore because I'm in bed by 7:30 or 8, right? So there's a lot of grief and loss components, and friendships got stressed because I couldn't do what I could do beforehand.
Yeah.
So that endurance was definitely taken from that accident, and since then it's come back, but at the same time, like you can't get that time back.
Oh no. And you had all this happen at, like, I dare say, a very pivotal point in life. Because like you said, in high school, between junior and senior year, people are applying for those other schools, and like people start going their own way. And so whenever a lot of us lose connection, it makes life difficult, very difficult. And so I can only imagine how stressful and how daunting it was to just push forward. So right there you have my accolades, because that's just awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, and it is hard, but that's also like you grow in that difficult arena when you're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like looking back, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't be where I am today without it. But in that moment, I'm just kind of like, dropping swear words inside my head because I'm like, what is going on with my life, right? And you can't see it when you're in the throes of it directly, right? But moving, through, I think it was like October or maybe early November when I had my like first concussion. So after a TBI, depending on the severity, of course, and again, I'm not a medical professional, I'm speaking from my experience, but like my head was very sensitive. So like if I bumped it on like a cupboard door that was open, like I could have that actual incident gave me a concussion.
Oh no.
So it's like very subtle things, that people take for granted.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until that first concussion where then my sleep, like I don't know what happened, if it was the concussion, if it was like my thoughts just starting to ruminate on if my head's okay or what does this mean. But then I was like, I would go to bed for 8 so I could fall asleep by 10 or 10:30. And then that was a very difficult process because I was like, why can't I fall asleep? Like, what is going on? And it wasn't, I think it was like that for it was probably like 7 or 8 months I was in that position where it was like I dreaded nighttime. I could take a nap without any issues. but I dreaded nighttime because I knew there'd be like an hour to 2.5 hour period where I wouldn't be able to fall asleep, and I would just toss and turn and get angry.
That's the worst too.
So it was wild.
Yeah.
And then there's other hallmarks of TBIs like anger, irritability. Looking back, I'm kind of like took a lot out on my family because they were like my support network at the house, but they're trying to love and support and help, but then they also took the brunt of the anger and the rage that would come out, just from the frustrations of grief and loss, the emotional piece, your brain healing from this injury. So there's kind of like, damn, like needed to apologize for how I treated them, and some of it is it's kind of like, unfortunately, like TBIs mess around with your mood quite a bit. So
yeah, the brain is really sensitive. So as far as I know, we still don't have the entire neural networking map. We have ideas, and that's kind of the best that we got.
It's pretty incredible what we do know and how we can assess for stuff. And I did a lot of, when I can't remember if I was in the hospital or if it was like right when I got out afterwards, but I did a battery of neuropsychological testing. And then like a year and a half later, I did another full battery, kind of like a pre and a post, to see what areas became better or worse, or what stayed the same. And we have some really remarkable ways. I mean, even like MRIs and functional MRIs to see what's going on, but we still don't know. There's still so much we don't know. And it's incredible that one person or two people can have a concussion, and they might have been like similar areas of the head, but both concussions impact the person differently. And I'm just like, wow, like it's remarkable.
Yep. And I mean, the brain itself is like, it's so fragile, but it's yet so resilient. And that's what's crazy, because it has neuroplasticity. And so I think that's kind of what they were doing with you. You were still so young that you had a lot of that. And so if you don't stretch it and use it, you're going to lose it, right?
And I think also too, like, when you're younger, your ability to bounce back from adversity and your body's ability to heal is at a greater level than when you're older. But even people who are in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, or 90s, like, still have an ability to form new neural pathways, neurogenesis. And it is incredible to see that level of growth right at that age. It's like your body can heal, your mind can heal, right? Your brain can heal. It's just remarkable.
Yeah. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of a mindful, like, thought and action, and that's really all it can be, because it is a muscle of sorts.
I mean, that self-reflection, silence, meditation, mindfulness, those are all very important aspects. I mean, getting into more of like the mental health therapy, right, can be very beneficial, because quite a few experiences that can create traumatic brain injuries do have an element of trauma or like overwhelm for the nervous system. So being able to also heal and reprocess those stressful memories can have a net benefit as well, just from the recovery process in general.
Yeah, but sometimes those are the uncomfortable feelings I like to avoid.
Oh yeah, just like most of the human race, myself included, right?
Yeah. But it always just feels so good coming out on the other side of it. But like you said, whenever you're in the throes of it, you can't see the end.
Right.
And so, like, I'm sitting here trying to help people. You're trying to help people. And who else better to help people than those that have been through it? So now that you graduated high school and everything, where did you go after that?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad in social work at the University of Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I went directly in, so graduated, was that like May, June, and then started in September.
Wow.
I I and my family made the choice that it was probably best that I stay at home for the first year, and just be able to have not the distractions of living on campus life that inherently show up.
Yeah.
So commuted, 4 or 5 times a week for classes for a year, and then second year moved in on campus.
Nice.
So that was a bigger transition. And then I think it was that second year, maybe like the latter half of the second year, I started some like part-time employment stuff, just like in the social work field, and then also at the university's recreation center. So
okay.
Started kind of pushing those boundaries, right? And then after that, I ended up at the University of Denver for my master's program in social work.
Sweet.
And since then, a lot of my like daytime work has centered around locked facilities, so county jails, inpatient psychiatric hospitals, and then soon to be Department of Corrections. So working with mental health recovery and those aspects. And then also my private practice that I run is focusing in on individual therapy. I do some couples and family stuff, but only if it like pertains to mental illness and the impacts on the family or the couple, or like a traumatic brain injuries impacts on the couple or the family. But yeah, otherwise just focusing in on mental health for men, and like helping men with stress and relieving stress, and dealing with grief and loss, trauma, PTSD, first responders, military. So
that's just awesome.
Yeah, it's coming together.
It is. So did your TBI like influence your choice in the career field that you're in? Did it? It did.
Yeah. I distinctly remember I was in the inpatient rehab, and I don't know. Again, this was also 15 years ago, so I don't like some things you just lose, right? But
yeah,
I had this thought of like I will land somewhere in like this profession, right? Be it nursing, be it physical therapy, speech therapy, and then I actually found. I was talking with my sister, who's also a social worker, and she was like, "You should check out this profession." And then I did a few volunteering opportunities, and I was like, "This is pretty cool." Right? Like how dynamic you can be from inpatient to medical social work to working at the VA, or having your own private practice, or all the above, right? And then graduated with my bachelor's, and then I was like, oh, to really do like the one-on-one work, right? You need to have a master's. So I was just like, okay, let's go. So yeah, that's kind of the trajectory of how it worked, right? I wouldn't have been in that hospital. I mean, I guess maybe I could have been in for a different reason, but like the inpatient stuff, if it hadn't been for my traumatic brain injury, right? And that's part of what I said when we started this, was like, I mean, would my life be different if I didn't have it? Yeah, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at, right? But at the same time, I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. And that's one of the sure signs of recovery right there, is being able to accept what has happened in the past, and be able to learn from it and use it as fuel for your fire. Use it as a motivator, and not to use it as something that it uses you and cripples you. But I mean, it's hard to do that. And you had said a word earlier that really just kind of encapsulates what it takes to do recovery, whether it be from drugs, shopping, so process addictions, or injuries in general, just any kind of recovery. And that word is grit. So you must have shown a lot of grit through the years, but of course in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like you were...
Yeah. In the middle, you're looking for the white flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. and I think that is part of why I love being a therapist, right? Is because
Mm-hmm.
now it's like it's not so much about me, right? Anymore. It's more about the person that's sitting next to me or with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how do we uncover that grit, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we pull that out? Because
yeah.
for better or worse, we have it. Sometimes we can be very stubborn and not want to use it, or use it too much that we can't see other perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so having that mindset and just being very curious about how does that show up, and that's part of the reasons I love working with, I mean, men in general, but also, I mean, not that females can't have grit, they definitely can, and we've seen that noted throughout history. But
Mm-hmm.
the first responders, the military, right? Like, excuse me, a lot of that are already tailwinds.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need to work on a little bit of like stigma around asking for help and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
But once we can access those tailwinds of grit, the recovery process is already like, okay, we just need to fine tune some things, and then everything will be okay.
Yeah.
Right? Because most of that character work is already there.
Mm-hmm. But that's the hard thing, is getting that character work done too,
Mm-hmm.
because part of building my character was also knowing who I was and who I wanted to be. But
Mm-hmm.
whenever I'm in active addiction, whenever I'm sitting there dealing with mental health issues, I don't see any future ahead for me.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine. I've had a broken femur, so I couldn't walk for 6.5 months, and I thought my life was over. So I can only imagine having your injury, and
Mm-hmm.
so I can only imagine the amount of grit you've actually had to show and develop it at such an early age too, nonetheless. Um, so, what would you say really kickstarted you getting your grit, if you can think of a moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to go back to kind of how I was raised,
Mm.
and also being in early athletics, like being challenged, and
Mm-hmm.
not saying that I rose to every challenge. I'm not perfect, right? Like, and I wasn't always like the best player. Like most of the time, I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But like always showing up, like knowing that okay, teams are depending on you, right?
Mm.
Or getting ready. I mean, Wisconsin still gets pretty cold, so we had a
Mm.
wood burner. So when it was like late summer, fall, like starting to chop wood, and that was not something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Right? But then after you do that for 2 or 3 hours, right? Or you bale hay for 8 hours on a summer day, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are things that we can do every day that kind of just like create that resolve.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like a muscle, right?
Yep.
Once you got it, you just have to work on it.
Yep.
So I
Just.
would definitely say those pieces came in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a piece too where you heal in a community, but
Mm.
the community isn't going to do the work for you,
Yes.
right? And that can be a very defeating feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and it can also be a very empowering feeling, and there's a lot of gray inside that powerlessness or the defeat and the empowering, right? There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
gray area, and sometimes you have to sit in it for a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't grow in our comfort zones, and
No.
that's something to, like, I think, keep a beat on. Is if you're feeling comfort, there's not a lot of growth probably.
No. It just means you've earned a break.
Mm-hmm.
Don't stop.
Sure. Yeah,
So.
life. I don't know. One of my favorite quotes is like, "Life doesn't send a warning shot." So you never know what's gonna come that night, the next day, right?
Mm-mm.
Um,
It's kind of like if you're always sitting there waiting for the perfect moment to have that difficult conversation, you're never going to have it.
mm-hmm.
And because life doesn't work that way. If
Right.
you're planning all this grandiose or difficult things, life's going to sit there and find a way to make it like, no, you're not going to have it your way. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to play by my rules a little bit. And it's like,
Sure.
I don't like you.
Yeah. Right. Right. And yeah, I mean, life is a very humbling experience,
Mm-hmm. Very
right?
humbling.
And not that we shouldn't exert our influence. There are some things that we can't
Mm-hmm.
change, right? Like I can't, no matter how hard I want to, I can't go back and change it
Mm-hmm.
for the TBI.
Yeah.
and I could waste a lot of energy, a lot of my mental resources, a lot of my emotional capacity trying to. But then that's where that kind of acceptance piece comes in.
Yeah. And so you don't burn yourself out trying to fix something. It's trying to figure out, what was it? There's a saying I heard in rehab, and it wasn't, why is this happening to me? I was told to flip it around and say, what can I get from this?
Yeah.
And that has really helped out a lot. But
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, just those subtle cognitive shifts, right, can be very empowering in terms of looking at it from, not like I can't figure this out, but how can I figure it out, right? And just trying to look at it from a different perspective can open up thought processes, can open up different perspectives or perspective taking, and then can also say like, wow, I could ask somebody for help. Like, I'm not the lone person here.
Yeah, but sometimes it feels like no one else is going through what I'm going through, and sometimes especially being a man in today's world, it's like if I ask for help, I'm not a man, and then what does that make me? It's like
I have some good blogs on that.
Oh yeah,
on my website to check out.
I'll definitely include the links on this episode.
Yeah,
because you've got a perspective, and your perspective needs to be heard, because that is just way too cool. So throw me one of your perspectives on it.
On asking for help? I mean, you could just look at it from the perspective of like the courage it takes to ask for help, right? Versus white knuckling, and where does that get you?
Yeah. Just
I mean, I'm pretty short and sweet. Like, I don't have a lot of fluff, so it's like if what you were doing is working, like, why are there challenges with it? Right?
Yeah, I like that.
I don't know, like white knuckling is kind of a term that gets used quite often in Wisconsin, and like you can only white knuckle it for so long, right?
Yeah, it gets used in the recovery rooms a lot, actually.
That's where I got it from. My undergrad social work internship was actually in it was split between community mental health, but also IOP for substance use recovery.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And real quick, you had mentioned something about community. So I know for myself, there's community for all sorts of addicts, alcoholics. I can go a whole lot of places, find meetings, and find like-minded people.
Yeah.
So my question is, with the life experience you've had, it's dealt a lot of trauma to you, and you've had to develop a whole bunch of character attributes that people your age at the time wouldn't have really had or wouldn't have really experienced. So you kind of felt alone. And now with community, surely there's got to be meetings or something of the sorts for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually. So there are meeting groups. I will say that my life has been so busy that I haven't had a lot of time to engage in them. I know, for example, in the state of Colorado, there's the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado.
Oh, wow.
Right. So that's kind of like giving them a huge shout out, because they have a statewide directory of, housing placements, how to get set up on state and, federal benefits, like coordinators and stuff like that. So it's a very large nonprofit, and they do a lot of good work. I don't know if every state has a resource like that specifically. But it's something for people to check out, and if not, create, right? Because not only is our TBIs hard on the person, but they're also hard when their family members see them struggling and they don't know what to do. So, getting to community, right? Like, I had my family, right? I had my speech therapist, who I still communicate with to this day. But, sometimes there are like, hey, someone's like, we just had somebody come up with a TBI, like, would you be willing to meet with them or something, almost like a peer, right? So definitely getting into that realm. Again, I haven't done a lot of there's not like not that I know of. I don't want to say there's not, but I don't know of any like AA parallels or NA parallels or anything like that to like TBI recovery. But it would definitely be something to consider. I'm sure like once you access certain systems, so for example, like the VA, right? They're a large system, probably deal with a lot of TBIs is my assumption. They probably have meeting groups, right? But again, those are pretty exclusive for people.
Yeah. And that would kind of make sense because it seems it's more of a specialized kind of thing. It's not like a disease per se where it can be spread or you can just catch it one day. Well, I mean, I guess you could kind of catch a TBI one day. Kind of just happens that way, right? So
that's what happened my day.
Sorry, not meaning to poke a joke at that. But...
No, you're fine. we got regular humor, we got dark humor. It's all good.
Okay, but I mean, it's got to be difficult still at times in your shoes, is it not? Because now you're kind of in a leadership position of sorts, in my perspective at least, because you're helping bring people along to get recovery of their own sorts. And being a leader is kind of lonely. So what do you do nowadays to keep a sense of community?
Well, I have my close friends, my family, other coworkers and stuff like that. But I'm extra. How do I want to say this? I'm an introvert with extrovert tendencies at times.
I call myself an introverted extrovert.
Right. So I recharge when it's quiet. Right.
Yep.
I think being able to recharge, to also then work with people one-on-one in therapy settings or in hospital settings or correctional settings, then is my that is how I give back, right? By seeing people level of self-esteem or their trauma not have the teeth in them anymore.
Seeing that spark in someone's eye.
Yeah. And sometimes that takes time. Therapy takes time. People sometimes want a quick 2-3 month thing, and it doesn't always happen that fast.
No.
Especially when you're dealing with stuff from childhood. Those neural networks are very deep. They're ingrained. So, but during this, I was like, I should create a Facebook group for TBIs. Like,
you
should. So that spark came into my head, and I'm just like, that'd be pretty neat. Just to create a community like that where and there are I know that there are a couple of Facebook groups already for TBIs nationwide. I think one is TBI Warriors. So
but I mean, to be fair, how many people actually here know about those kind of things? Because you always
hopefully your listeners will share.
Well, I mean, it's going to be all over the nation, so
right.
If y'all are listening to this, definitely check out his new Facebook group for TBI.
Yeah, there you go. And there are other ones already established too, right? And all those I think the Facebook groups are nice, or any group's nice, right? Because you get to see this wow, these people have been in it for 3, 4, 6, 10 years, right? And you see that end of the spectrum, and then you see the other end of I'm 2 months out from surgery, right? How do I find jobs that I can do?
Yep.
Right. So it's a very close knit group, right? I mean, it's very similar to any forms of recovery for folks.
Yeah, for sure. So in the AA book, there's actually a passage where they're talking about how being in AA, we form lifelong bonds and relationships because we're fighting a common enemy, addiction or alcohol. And so with that being the only factor that we know of that connects us, it creates a strong bond because we're going in the same direction and we've both faced similar trials.
Yes.
And so the same thing could be said with the TBIs.
Mhm.
Everyone's story is going to be different. Not everyone had the same accident. Not everyone had to go through the same inpatient therapy, so on and so forth.
Right.
And so to be able to sit there and say, hey, look, like this person has X amount of time, this person has X amount of time, that gives people hope. And
Mhm.
it even gives some people a little bit of courage,
Yeah.
just like it's okay.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's uh, the going back to the Colorado Brain Injury Alliance or the Brain Injury
Hmm.
Alliance of Colorado, they also have like a specific TBI oriented podcast,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So, getting that stuff out,
Hmm.
and sharing that, because there are personal stories on there of recovery, which are,
Hmm.
as you know, gold for people in the throes of it.
Hmm. Because who else better to tell what's going on than someone that's going through it?
Hmm.
And it takes a lot of courage just to be able to sit there and share a story.
Right.
So, like what you're doing now, it's a crap ton of courage. And I mean, you have so much wisdom to share with everyone that's been going through or has been through a TBI or any other traumatic things back in the past. So, like, I just got to say, like, it's an honor to have you on here.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. It's an honor to meet you and also hear a little bit about your story.
well,
Right? I
thanks.
mean, it's so interesting how there are not parallels in terms of so much the story, but the recovery has so many similar concepts, right?
Hmm.
Of the importance of community, the importance of grit, the importance of asking for help.
Yep.
So
Yeah, because in the end, recovery is recovery. It's retrieving or getting back to a normal state of mind, body, and strength.
hmm
Um, and so I think if I were to separate each one of those into its own category, they'd each have their own pros and cons of like what is life struggles going to be
right.
with this. But at the same time, I could sit there and I could say, well, each one of these has almost every single thing in common in
hmm
one way or another.
Yeah.
And but it just takes people like you to be able to sit there and show people that it's possible.
hmm
So,
Yeah, and I think like there are themes that are interwoven between
mm,
different recovery areas, right? Even though
mm,
on a granular level they may look strikingly different,
yep,
right? And that's also something to keep in mind too, from a TBI perspective of sometimes somebody, again going back to the concussion, but also
mm-hmm,
any forms of TBI, like somebody can have, or two people can have very similar TBIs, but one person's not able to walk again and the other
mm-hmm,
person is, right?
mm-hmm,
And that's going back to, we don't know all this stuff about the brain.
mm-hmm.
Really a frontier that we'll learn more about, but it's again something that takes time.
It's probably the final frontier, if we're going
Yeah,
to be honest.
yeah. There's a lot to it.
Hmm. So, what are some of the things that you would have told either your younger self, or what are some of the things that you would tell someone that's recovering from TBI right now?
Yeah, lots. I feel like a lot of thoughts are running through my head. So, kind of going back to tell myself that, and new people, again, there's that rush, there's that push, and unfortunately, we need to slow things down to allow the body to heal.
Hmm.
And I think for me, when I was a kid and looking back, it's like, yeah, you're a kid, like impulsivity with the TBI, anger, like wanting to get your life back, right? It's hard to slow things down, but really, like the brain and the body just need to recover.
Hmm.
And that can be a long process, 6, 9, 12 months, 24 months.
Hmm.
I don't think my fatigue really, I mean, my fatigue was improving, but like, so this is an example.
Hmm.
I, so in my first year of undergrad, I was still coming home and taking naps, even
Hmm.
though I was a year and a half out of my TBI.
Hmm.
So like, I mean, that's 18 months, right?
Yeah.
And I
Uh,
think there's the hard part with TBIs too is that you won't always, like, at first your body heals quickly, right? Physical injury heals quickly, scars, stuff like that, scabs, right? And then like some of these slower cognitive functions still tend to improve, but they improve at a decreasing rate, so like to the point where you don't always notice it. But like if somebody saw you 1 month and then saw you 2 or 3 months later, it'd be like, wow, like before you couldn't carry on a conversation that long, right? So some of those pieces we don't always notice, and they also, it's frustrating because they slow down so much.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I think the patience is key, right? Using your support system, using your character grit, pulling grit in where you can, just to keep pulling through as hard as you can. Nobody's gonna do it for you, and I think that's the other part I would say is like, it's a shitty position to be in, nonetheless, right? And at the same time, nobody's gonna heal for you. You gotta put in the work.
That's a lot of wisdom, and sadly, it's wisdom that you had to go through with experience.
Yeah, I know, but here we are.
Yeah. And but I mean, with that kind of experience, again, you're able to be that leader. You're able to help heal younger you, and you're able to help heal people that go to you. And so it's just one of those things. Again, it's just come full circle.
Yeah.
So my question is, it's kind of an odd one. Have you had a not deal with, that's the absolutely wrong word. Have you had someone that you've worked with that has had almost your story, like auto accident in high school, so on and so forth, and basically like whenever you saw this person, it was kind of like looking in the mirror or like a weird time machine, just like you saw yourself in that person even?
Yeah, I don't know if the situations are match up exactly, but I can't remember the statistic, but it's like 60 to 80% of the people in the criminal justice system have a form of a TBI, from like concussion to like severe, right? So like you like, it's pretty staggering once you get in, and I can't remember if that's county jail or if that's Department of Corrections level. But I mean, that's pretty staggering, right? Like when you think of the amount of people that are, at least in the US, that are incarcerated. So I mean, have I met people that have TBIs? I mean, every day I go on the unit at the hospital. Yeah. It's just, were they always auto? No. A lot of them come from like physical altercations or violence or falling because of, blacking out from substance use or something like that. Or some of the other ones are just like, there's brain injury or just like brain atrophy due to neurocognitive impairments that are setting in because of age or exposure to certain substances that they've been using. But yeah, I mean, there are certain times where you look at the person, you're like, they're very close in age, and you're like, it could have been like, what if I didn't heal the way I did, or if I got hit like a few centimeters in a different area. It's kind of like, damn, my life could be drastically different quickly.
The whole what if game, the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, but a little bit more morbid. So
definitely, and yeah, I mean, there's people in the hospital that I still remember that were in the inpatient units that were, had TBIs, but their functioning level was, 100% dependent on other people that time, but also for the rest of their lives.
So I would consider yourself rather blessed and lucky, whichever you want to call it. But I've also got to say that you've put in the work. You've shown the grit. You've shown the resilience, the patience, and just everything that goes into getting to where you are today. So I just want to say, like, dude, that's awesome. Keep it up and keep it going.
Well, there's a lot of other people walking, again, this TBI recovery path out there, and most of the time people don't even recognize it, right? Because it's kind of like one of those invisible scars.
Yeah.
And then you have, a lot of other people, as we've been discussing in the show, walking the path of recovery from addiction, alcohol, shopping, porn,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
everything. So
Yeah, literally anything can be an addiction,
mm-hmm.
at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, some people just say, it's just shopping. It's not that bad until they can't pay rent,
Right.
and then so on and so forth. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just one of those things that we can't really let up on trying to get better, you know,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like whenever I stagnate, that's whenever I start to grow bacteria and mosquitoes, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm suddenly not that good person anymore that recovery has
Sure.
brought me to be. I've got to be moving with one step forward, and that's what I'm sure you had to
Mm-hmm.
do with your TBI is you've got to take that next step. You can't just sit
Yeah.
there and say, I'm done. I give
Yeah.
up. So you can have moments like that. You can have a day or two,
Sure.
but
Sure.
you can't give up.
I mean, you're always gonna get knocked down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a part of the process. It's how characters formed. It's how
Mm-hmm.
grit is honed, refined.
Yeah. What's that saying? A knife is forged in fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. I can't quote it, but I know
You
what you're
know it.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh
Mm-hmm.
man, like this sucks. Oh, it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yay.
right, right. Now they got to put on the heat or something.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Now the hammer starts coming, and then
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah, definitely.
But real quick question: do you know what September is?
What is September? Is it? It's not Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, is it?
No.
No.
Kind of close though.
What is it?
It's Suicide Prevention Month.
Ah.
Yes.
Right.
So do you know that number? It's 3 digits.
Suicide. What do you mean by? Do I know?
Suicide hotline.
Oh, the
Suicide prevention
933
988.
988.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So close.
Yeah, close. But it's a good concept to bring up. 988. I thought at first you said the 3-digit number. I was like, is that how many people die a day? But
oh, I mean, it honestly could be.
yeah.
I know I looked up the statistics and I was rather saddened by them, so I decided to delete it out of my memory bank.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, 988 if you're having suicidal thoughts or just need support.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 24/7 hotline, so.
Yeah. Is there any shout outs that you would like to give to, say, yourself, other colleagues, or podcasters, or anything like that?
Not so much the podcasters, but more so for like the healthcare workers that are working with TBIs, because it's hard. I mean, you're dealing with grown people that need all of their daily living skills or needs met, from food to bathroom to also then the healing part. It's tiresome. It's also very slow in terms of progress. So just giving them a shout out from the neurosurgeons to the psychologists and neuropsychologists, the nursing staff, the PTs, the speech therapists, OTs, rec therapy. So yeah, they're all needed in terms of moving that needle forward.
That's awesome. It sounds like they all have a very special place in your heart.
They do.
That's awesome. Way too good.
Yeah.
So I haven't done this before, but do you got any questions for me?
Not
None.
any that I have related
Perfect.
to like the topics.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, you can always message me with any other questions.
Sure. Yeah.
But do you want to give a shout out to your private practice?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my private practice is called Revitalize Mental Health. It's located in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Wisconsin and in Colorado. So unfortunately, how the laws work, I can only see people if they're residing in those states. Hopefully soon to be licensed in Illinois, but that's going to take a few weeks. So So that's kind of a damper for the nationwide audience if they're looking for therapy. But again, we focus heavily on men's issues, from divorce to child loss, trauma, PTSD, complex PTSD. We use EMDR therapy, somatic experiencing therapy, and we do in person if you live close enough, and then also virtual.
That is all too awesome.
So thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. I appreciate you, and thank you for being on the show, Daniel. Because, I've learned a whole bunch about TBIs that I didn't really know, and now I've got someone's awesome story to say, hey, I know a survivor. If he can do it, you can too.
Cool.
So,
keep the inspiration going.
Yeah, that's what we're here for, right? We're here to share stories. We're here to help lift people up and help maybe shift a perspective just because they got stuck behind a hedge in a maze, So it's all about just reaching back and pulling up. So
definitely. Even though it takes time.
It does take time. It is a process and not a pill. So
what is it like? Process over outcome. The outcome is the process by which the process becomes the outcome.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I do remember.
Yeah, it's kind of a mind bender.
It's kind of like those who care don't matter, and those who matter don't care. Something like that. But
but it's the process, right? It's the becoming process.
Yeah, and even though it's painful, it is definitely well worth it getting through on the other side.
For sure.
All right, Daniel. Well, that is all the time that we have for this episode. Real quick, though, I do like to have people on more than once because I like to try to catch up and see where their journey has taken them or something like that. So could we see
definitely
you back on? All right.
Yeah, we could do 6-9 months or something, however long, 3 months.
All right. That sounds awesome.
Definitely down.
Sounds good. Well, Daniel, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I just hope that all the best to you, your private practice, and many blessings to you, your loved ones, and all those that are around you.
No, I appreciate the kind words, and same for you too, especially on this journey.
Thank you very much, Daniel. All right. And to all the listeners out there, thank you for listening on WDJY-FM. And don't forget to check out retrievingsanity.com. And don't forget, if you need any help and you live in the Colorado or Wisconsin area, give Daniel a shout out. So that's all we got. Sean.